What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another live stream. Only a couple of weeks out from the trials for a lot of you. If you are in year 12, New South Wales, you've got your trials around the corner. Some of you might have them next week. I know a lot of students have their trials in a couple of weeks. So even if you're watching this later on in the year before your HSC, what I'm going to do this evening is actually look at last year's HSC exam paper and just give you my general thoughts on how I would approach the paper, how I would think about the different questions, what I would do first. Because I think the strategy that's required to do well in English is extremely underrated, undervalued. You need to actually think in advance a lot about how you're going to approach the exam, what you're going to do first, how much time you need to spend on different elements. So that's what I'm going to do this evening. I'm going to go through the 2024 HSC paper and talk through each question, each section, what I would be doing, what I would be careful of. And if you have any follow-up questions on those sections, please do let me know. But hopefully in the next week or so, we've got that section 1 breakdown, another section 1 breakdown coming out. We'll be looking at another HSC section 1 exam, and then we'll be going through how to actually answer all of those questions. How do you actually get full marks, 20 out of 20, in the section 1 part of the exam? And how do you do that in timed conditions? So we'll have a look at that as well. But if any of you guys have any questions right now off the bat, feel free to put them in the chat. Nice to see a few of you here. Otherwise, we're going to get into this and just start looking at a past HSC paper and talking through common mistakes and the ideal strategy to optimize your performance. So let me just share the screen now and let's get into it. If we can, that is. I've got a couple of screens set up here, so bear with me while I pull these up. Here we go. Let's see if we can get this working for us. Doesn't like this screen, guys, so just bear with me. Pulling up the 2024 HSC. Maybe I'll have to pull it up on a browser instead, which is fine. No big deal. Here we are. All right, sharing now, HSC 2024 paper. Hopefully I can get in the right spot here. I think we're all set. And just before I get into it, in terms of the question that's just come through, thank you, Ramesa. I wanted to ask if you do a 6 or 5 marker short response. Really need help with those. I would appreciate if you can go through it. Yes, I can. That's going to be in the section 1 breakdown video. Hopefully get that out later this week, by the end of this week, maybe the weekend, a breakdown of section 1. So you can see how I would go through a 5 or a 6 marker question for section 1. I'll do that. Not going to do it this evening. We're going to focus on overall strategy, how to think about each part of the exam, but I will get to that in another video. In terms of other questions, before we look at this one, is it too late to memorize all my essays? No, it's not too late. I think right about now is the time you should be familiarizing yourself with your essays, but you should only be doing so if you've timed the essays, handwritten them, timed them, and cut them down so that you've got them between 32 and 34 minutes. If your draft essays that you're memorizing or learning or familiarizing with are longer than 34 minutes as a draft, you're going to go over time on the day of the exam when you try to actually change parts of that essay and answer the question. Or you're not going to go over time and you're going to ignore the question and just regurgitate what you already had. So it's imperative that before any of you start truly memorizing or familiarizing yourselves with the essay, some of you will memorize word for word. Some of you will just get familiar with it and do practice questions and effectively learn the arguments that you're going to be making each time, although you might be changing the word in and changing different bits and pieces. You should be familiar with one draft essay for each of those essay sections. But the key thing is that you've cut them down and got them to around 32 minutes on average, 32 to 34 minutes. Otherwise, you're going to run out of time, or you're going to make other sacrifices that you don't have to make. So you have to be very disciplined right now, 2 weeks out from your exams, in cutting down your drafts. You're going to have to remove parts you don't want to remove. I know a lot of you will probably think, no, I really like that piece of evidence. I really like that sentence. Work on merging sentences together, cutting out the sentences that aren't as important, shorten your conclusions, get rid of maybe the last link sentence. You have to do whatever it takes to get the essay down to 32 to 34 minutes when you handwrite it out, okay? It's only then that I would start really committing it to memory if I am going to memorize it that way. And 2 weeks is plenty of time to do that. You just have to schedule in time and do it sequentially. Only learn one thing at a time. So, if you're memorizing an essay, you would just do one essay in full, then you move on to the next one and so forth. Okay. But again, you don't have to do it word for word. Some of you will just memorize tables of analysis. So you know all of your quotes, your techniques. I would at least know an introduction and topic sentences, ideally those word for word, because that is what is going to set the strongest impression in the marker's mind in terms of how well you've responded to the question. And you might think, well, doesn't that mean we wouldn't memorize the introduction and the topic sentences? But no, because you already need to be set up with a sophisticated framework and argument that you can tie the question into. So you're not going to have as a sophisticated response if you don't already have great vocabulary in there that you've learned that you can then adapt to the question. So because the introductions and topic sentences are really the most important elements of any essay, they're the things that I would be committing the most to memory. And then, of course, you have to learn your quotes and techniques, but you don't have to learn all of that word for word because you will be tweaking what you say about the quotes and the evidence based on the question. And you can be a little bit more flexible with those. I personally like to memorize quite a lot because it gives me a sense of confidence that I at least have a fallback. I at least have this base essay I can rely on. And that allows me to focus all of my attention on answering the question on the day, especially because I've already timed it and I know I've got plenty of time to adapt throughout. Not plenty of time, I mean, no time to waste, but I've got exactly the right amount of time to get enough quantity out because I've memorized it, I'm faster, but also to get the quality out in terms of how well I'm answering the question and having that sophistication already in there. So 2 weeks is definitely enough time for all of you to learn your essays. Don't start learning them until you have timed them and cut them down 32 to 34 minutes. Given we got a few questions here, I'm just going to jump back up here, face on screen, while we answer some of this. How do you formulate your topic sentences? Do you do it after you have found all of your evidence? Because I feel that if you do it before, you are restricting what evidence you can find. Phoenix, great question. It's an interesting one. You kind of have to do both. You have to look at the text and look at the kinds of examples that you're interested in and think about what kind of ideas are coming through overall from those groups of evidence that you are interested in. So you don't have to have written all of your analysis first, but just getting a feel for the types of evidence that you're looking at in a particular section of a text. Say you're looking at the opening of a film and you can see 3 kind of key scenes or 3 bits of evidence you're really interested in, and you analyze them and you get a sense of what they're about, then you can formulate the topic sentence and then obviously have that evidence in mind because you know it's going to support them. But you don't have to have written out your sentences of analysis in full before you do your topic sentences. And actually, in planning out an essay, the best essays are the ones where you do the topic sentences first. So you think about all 3 topic sentences before you start really fleshing out the analysis. However, when you do your 3 topic sentences in a row, because that helps you have a progression in your argument, like you go from topic sentence 1 to 2 to 3, you already have thought about those. The best ones as well are going to be the ones where you've already considered the types of evidence that you would use to back those up. So you're not just coming up with random ideas that you can't then support. So in terms of actual drafting, I would draft the topic sentences first, but only after considering the evidence that would back up those points. So you're kind of doing both, but the first thing you do is look at the text and analyze it, have some examples on the ready, but Then when you actually are redrafting or drafting for the first time your essay, I would do the topic sentences first. Topic sentence 1, 2, 3. Then start bringing in those examples based on subpoints. So not only do you have to think about the topic sentence, but you have to think about the more specific points that back up the topic sentence to help you expand. And you want to make sure that you're not just introducing 3 examples that are going to be making the same point. So even if you have 3 good pieces of evidence, they're only good pieces of evidence if they're all making slightly different but connected points. So I always think about the topic sentences, then I think about the mini points or subpoints I'm going to make with the evidence in mind, and then I'm only going to use evidence that is truly making a unique point. I'm not going to bring in a piece of evidence just because it sounds fancy because I've got a great technique if it's really making the same point that I made in the previous sentence. So think about your concepts and ideas first with evidence in mind. It's like with evidence in mind, but you don't actually need to do all of your specific sentences of analysis before you build that scaffold, that skeleton of ideas. It's actually more important to do the skeleton of ideas first. Okay, but great question in terms of that, in terms of actual writing topic sentences. First, in terms of how do you formulate the topic sentences, what you basically want your topic sentences to be cause and effect as a structure, and you want the topic sentences to move through the text, move through the ideas of the text. So I always use the problem, consequence, resolution structure. So my first topic sentence focuses on the start of the text, what's the problem or complication, and I frame it as a cause and effect statement. So, the problem of the text might be framed as, Orwell, if I'm thinking about 1984, George Orwell's 1984 explores the potential for totalitarian governments to oppress individuals and take away their autonomy. And that is a cause and effect statement because you're saying if a government is totalitarian, that's the cause, they take away people's freedom. That's the effect. So you have to have a cause and effect statement or claim in the topic sentence, and each topic sentence should match the different parts of the text, beginning, middle, end. What are the ideas that are evolving over the course of the text? So hopefully that makes sense. I've also got a video on YouTube that basically goes through very specific examples of how to write topic sentences. So you should look for that video. It'll go step by step how to do that, especially if you're doing a 2-part topic sentence where you have a conceptual topic sentence and then you bring in the text after it, because you don't have to mention the text itself or the author in the very first sentence of the body paragraph. You could do it in the second sentence of the body paragraph. Either can work, but you could do that kind of 2-stage approach. Are you able to give feedback on my Module B paragraph? We're not going to get to specific examples. It's unlikely we'll get to it. We'll see how we're going for time, but I'm just going to base the timing here off the questions, and we'll see what we get to. But I really do want to pull up the 2024 HSC paper and just give you thoughts on the strategy there, because a lot of people have been asking about that. I was wondering from Mod A if the paragraphs need to be integrated for the Richards, or can I do 2 overarching statements and do a paragraph under them for each text? Yeah, so you can do Module A in a couple of different ways, well, probably 3 different ways. You can do 4 paragraphs if you're a really fast writer. I would do 4 paragraphs, and you essentially split your Module A essay into 2 halves. So the first half is based on the problem, the shared problem that each text is exploring, and then you do text A in the first body paragraph and text B in the second paragraph, and you compare them and you talk about the resonances, the dissonances, similarities, differences, and in relation to that problem idea. So maybe it's like the problem of imprisonment or the problem of power. Great, that's the first half. The second half of the essay, again, you explore another idea, but in relation to both texts. So if the first key idea for the first half of the essay was power, maybe the second one is about forgiveness, or maybe it's about a related idea after power, freedom, something like that. And what you want to do then is talk about each text in bodies 3 and 4 respectively. So body 3 would be the first text, body 4 would be the other text. So that's splitting your essay into 2 halves and doing 1 paragraph per idea per text. The other way you could do it, you're asking about, do the paragraphs need to be integrated? In that case, that first example, your paragraphs don't need to include both text. You don't have to have a balanced analysis in each body paragraph. That's actually really hard to do, and I wouldn't recommend that for most students. However, you can do a 3-body paragraph structure for Module A textual conversations, whereby you have 3 ideas, and then you talk about each text within each paragraph. So I would do 2 sentences of analysis on the first text, then 2 sentences of analysis on the second text. And that's in 1 body paragraph in relation to 1 shared idea. And then you do that 3 times. So that's the integrated approach, but again, really tricky. Now, for most students, in fact, the approach that I would recommend is actually doing 3 paragraphs, whereby the first paragraph is on text A, so Richard III. The second body paragraph is on text B, so looking for Richard. And the third paragraph is mixed. It's both. And the reason you do that is because it's almost trying to do the 4-body paragraph, but 4 body paragraphs is often just too much to do in the time that you get given. So you compress the second half of the essay into 1 paragraph. So look, Richard III, looking for Richard, Richard III, and looking for Richard in the third. That's the only combined paragraph. And again, you would follow the structure of what's the first big idea, and then first body paragraph and second body paragraph are both in relation to that key idea. And then you have the second big idea, and that's where you do a merged paragraph in response to that idea. So they're kind of different structures. You could do 2 paragraphs. If you were a much slower writer, you might just do 1 big paragraph on text A and then 1 big paragraph on text B, or you could merge both texts into each of the 2 paragraphs. But again, I'd only do 2 body paragraphs if you're really struggling for time. So if you're particularly slow writer, you could merge both texts into each of those 2 paragraphs, which are about 2 different ideas. Hopefully that makes sense. So you've got a few different options there. A lot of it is about your speed and also potentially about, your teacher's preference or what they've been kind of teaching you. Ramesa, can we go through how to write an introduction for a short answer response? You said that the introduction gives a marker. Yeah, so for short responses, the introduction is less important. It's important structurally for a 6 or 7 marker. But if you've got a 3, 4, or 5 marker in section 1, then you can just do a topic sentence followed by the correct amount of analysis, right? So if it's a 3 marker, you can do 3 sentences, 1 topic sentence, 2 sentences of analysis. If it's a 5 marker, you can do 1 topic sentence plus 4 sentences of analysis. And you don't need to worry about the link sentence. What students end up doing is wasting time on a link sentence for a short answer response, and they just end up repeating the same thing as their topic sentence. So the only time you have to actually be concerned about an introduction is for a 6 marker or a 7 marker in most cases. For a 5-mark question, you can potentially split up the paragraph into a mini essay structure, but I've seen students get full marks within a 5 marker just having 1 bigger paragraph. And if that's the fastest way to do it, then that's what I would be encouraging. So 6 or 7 marker, you will have a 1-sentence introduction, which will most likely be comparing 2 texts. Typically, it's a compare question. And you would just introduce the ideas or introduce the contrasting ideas of each text. And then you would just have 2 small body paragraphs for each text, and then a 1-sentence conclusion that doesn't just repeat the same ideas, but it says what the impact on the responder is in relation to the human experiences that were explored. So I said how important the introduction and topic sentences are for your essays. For the short answer responses, the equivalent would be the topic sentence that is the first sentence of each paragraph answer. So I will go through that shortly. Can you please show an example of a paragraph relevant to any HSC text with 4 sentences? Do you mean a body paragraph for an essay-based module there? 4 sentences? I mean, there are not a lot of body paragraphs in an essay that would only have 4 sentences. So do you mean like for a 4-marker short answer response? Just let me know what exactly you're looking for there. And Phoenix, now I have to go back up to see what we're, how do you formulate a topic sentence for short answers? Okay. So when you guys are doing short answer responses and you're doing a topic sentence, why don't we just go through a quick example? I'm sure you probably want to see an example of this, and then I'll come back to some of these questions. So I'm going to share a different screen now, and why don't we just look at an example of a short answer question? And without even looking at the text for the sake of this, why don't we just pull up a question and just go with something that could be the case. So, I mean, we'll go back to this guy. I like this view. Okay, so let's have a quick look at an example of a question, a short answer question. So this is the 2024 section 1, and the first question is, how does green invite the reader to consider aspects of the human sense of smell, right? How does green invite the reader to consider aspects of the human sense of smell? That's a very specific question. I probably would want to look at the text just to get a sense of where that's going, but let me find a better example that doesn't require me to look at the text. Of course, you should always look at the text. I'm just going to come up with a basic example that shows the point. We've got here, analyze how Vincent connects the significance of measurement to human experience. I don't have the context for what they mean by measurement, but let's use that one. So I'm going to put that into a document, and then we can break that down. All right, is that one showing for you? Here we go. This one is a common module essay question. And what we want to look at now, because a lot of you are asking about topic sentences for short answers. So let's just say, now I'm going to grab that question again. Analyze how Vincent, the composer of this one, connects the significance of measurement to human experience. That it's like, I guess that it's important to measure it, or maybe it's not important, right? But without even looking at the text here, I just want to show you an example of a topic sentence. So the trick with a topic sentence, okay, is you want to say, there's a couple of things, right? You need to add one specific insight, one specific idea that expands on the key terms of the question. And what you also need to do is, when you use the key terms of the question, this is part of the first one, when you use the key terms of the question, expand on those terms, right? Now, by using adjectives, I'll give you the two ways. Adjectives before the words, or you can do both of these, and/or words like of or from after the keywords. You'll see what I mean in a second based on this. So we need to add one specific insight. Well, what's the way to actually do that? I'll give you guys all an incredible trick that you can use, okay? You use a phrase that is like the power of, the capacity for, the potential for. So for those of you who have stuck around so far for this part, this might be the most valuable piece of advice I can give you, okay? Super valuable in terms of how you can easily create a topic sentence. So what do I mean by these phrases? Let's look at how you would break this down. Analyze how Vincent connects the significance of measurement to human experience. Vincent, sometimes I would say connects, but we don't want to just repeat the whole question, right? So what you do is you say Vincent conveys, right? Now with significance of measurement, we can say conveys the power. Now, notice this, the power of. I'm using the power of because then I need to substitute the keywords in here while also expanding on them. And I'm going to say the power of something to do with measurement to something to do with human experience. So if you can actually understand what I'm doing here, I'm creating a structure that's encouraging me to do the right thing. Okay, so Vincent conveys the power of something to do with measurement to something to do with human experience. And it's going to be like a cause and effect. So Vincent conveys the power of measuring. I mean, you don't have to say measurement, but you should definitely use the word measure in, measurement, one of those things. The power of measuring, again, I'm going to make it up. It's just something you could do, but I'm going to add something specific. The power of measuring one's past achievements through, maybe you measure your past achievements through the satisfaction that it brings you, right? Through emotional satisfaction, i.e., like maybe the measure of your life is not the money you make, but it's the feelings that you were able to cultivate and share with others, right? So without even looking at the text, haven't looked at the text here, just giving you a random example. Vincent conveys the power of measuring one's past achievements or one's life through emotional satisfaction. See how specific I'm getting here? This is not in the question. I've added this in based on my understanding of the text. Vincent conveys the power of measuring one's past achievements. See how I'm expanding after the keyword? That's what I meant before with expanding when I said words like of or from. In this case, we're saying conveys the power of measuring one's past achievements through emotional satisfaction. Now, the power of doing that to, what are we going to say? To improve the quality, right? Of one's present human experience. So what human experience is it? Your present human experience. Again, I'm going to put in that in blue. Here's the one's present experience, like maybe we'll say in old age or something like that. It would depend. I haven't looked at it again, so we're just kind of making something up that could work. But to improve the quality of one's present human experience. But again, we've said what type of human experience? Present, because we're measuring your past achievements. So Vincent conveys the power of measuring one's past achievements through emotional satisfaction to improve the quality of one's present human experience. So if you see how I've used that structure, if all of you can just see that right now, I've used explores the power of, don't worry about the explores word so much, text A explores the power of something to do something. See, that's cause and effect in its simplest form, right? That is allowing you to do cause and effect. The capacity for, measuring one's life in terms of friendships rather than money or something, right? Measuring the quality of one's life in terms of friendships, the power of that to reflect a more enriched human experience. You know what I mean? So to improve the quality, yeah, or to enrich one's, I mean, they're saying similar things, right? To enrich one's kind of shared human experiences or something like that. So a couple of different examples there in terms of where you could go with that. But I'm just going to check here in the comments, like, does this make sense in terms of how you could generate a topic sentence? This is the kind of structure you can all use to quickly come up with a topic sentence. Again, we're not basing it on any particular question. So when I release the latest section 1 full walkthrough where I go through all of the actual text and the answers, you'll see more specific examples. But this is the kind of structure you'll see me use again and again because it saves time. You've already got a structure to use. It does the right thing. And then you bring in your sentences of analysis after. So hopefully that helps in terms of how you would do a topic sentence. And let's have a look at some other things here. Yeah, in terms of having a topic sentence that does enough, again, it's, do you have a cause and effect statement? Do you say that something leads to something? You don't have to say the words leads to or causes, of course, but do you say that this can lead to this? And have you expanded on the keywords of the question? So if the keyword of the question, like you saw before, was measurement, have you said what is being measured? What type of measurement? Measuring the quality of one's life. That's expanding on the keyword of the question to avoid repeating the question. but you also need to say something about measuring one's quality of life, that enhances a shared human experience, or that enhances an individual human experience. So, and you might even say a human experience of something. So by kind of adding bits before and after each keyword, but also having this overall cause and effect statement, that is going to ensure that you are doing enough to get the marks for your topic sentences, especially for your section 1 responses. So I assume that you are referring to, again, back here, just any essay with 4 sentences per paragraph. Are you saying not a 20 marker? I'm still confused. Is this for short answers? I find it hard to think that 4 sentences is possible, especially since each sentence would need to be quote, technique, verb, effect, and context, which seems a lot. Yeah, so there are plenty of examples of paragraphs for an essay. If you're talking about an essay, 20-mark essay, that have a topic sentence, 3 to 4 sentences of analysis, all packed together in one sentence, and a link sentence. So that's a 6-sentence paragraph, or a 5-sentence if you only have 3. Now, you're right in saying I find it hard to think that's possible, because aren't the sentences all going to be really clunky because there are so many things jammed into one sentence? And that's true, especially if you are not efficient and concise with your expressions. So that's why having a good vocabulary helps, because it allows you to say more with less, right? You can actually say more things in fewer words if you have the right words. Otherwise, you end up needing to kind of really spell it out. So good vocabulary helps compress it, but also being really efficient with your sentence structures and realizing that you don't have to have context in every single sentence. But when you do have context, you could start the sentence with a clause like reflect in the post-war anxieties, or reflect in the, we could say that reflect in the psychological turmoil of the post-war era. That's such a short, but nonetheless precise phrase capturing the essence of the context there. So you're saying, look, there were psychological anxieties after World War II, and you just say reflect in the psychological turmoil or anxieties of the post-war era, comma, Orwell's use of ... and then you get into your technique, you add the quote, and then you say the effect, and you've got it. Now, can you elaborate on that first sentence in a second sentence? Yes. But then if all of your sentences of analysis are split up into 2 sentences, it's very hard to do that in the word allocation. That's why I understand why you're saying it's hard to think that 4 is possible. Absolutely, it is hard to do. The best responses do it though, because it's all about efficiency. How much can you say in the time that you're given? And the students who really put in the work at cutting down all of their sentences so every single word matters, every single phrase is needed, you're not repeating the same point and having these like circular arguments where you've already said something, but then you say it in a different way after. It's all a waste of words. Can you make it as compact as possible so it sounds super simple? You've mentioned context, you've mentioned the quote, but you only used a very short quote. See, these are all little tricks. A lot of students use a quote that's like 1 or 2 lines long, when you could have just kind of chopped up the quote and taken out the little 1-word, 2-word pieces and integrated into the sentence. And that's cut down a whole sentence, because you were wasting so much time just repeating words in the quote that weren't even needed for the point you wanted to make. So cut down the quote, add in a short clause at the start for context, find the right vocabulary to say what you want to say in as fewer words as possible. All of these things will help you get to a 1 sentence of analysis, a single sentence of analysis that still checks all the boxes, so to speak. So hopefully that makes sense. I mean, you are saying, can I find an example? Yeah, sure. Let's have a look at an example for all of you. So give me 1 second. I'll find something recent. Of course, JeddAI, if you had a look at the examples there, plenty of examples on there of single sentences of analysis. But let me just find something to illustrate the point. So I'll show you what I mean by a sentence of analysis. There's only 1 sentence, but it does everything it needs to do. I'm going to find one that maybe has context in it as well. So again, bear with me, just having a look at some, I have to find some older responses as well, because I'm not going to share any present, current student responses who haven't shared it. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to share a sentence of analysis that has all of the elements in it. And yes, of course, you can expand further on the example I'm going to show you. But the idea is that it doesn't need to be multiple sentences to get all of the core material in there. So let's have a look. This is just a random example I've plucked out from past student. Reflecting the collectivist attitudes of Stalinism. Bang, that's context done. See, context dealt with in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. 6 words, context done. The accumulation technique done. The accumulation of visceral imagery. Okay, expanded technique, that's good. The accumulation of visceral imagery. During the 2-minute tape. Great, so we've even got some context from within the text. You've told me when this happens. Particularly as members of the outer party are overwhelmed by a desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces. Efficient use of a quote. Look at that. It's not that long. That quote is not that long, and yet it shows an accumulation of visceral imagery, a desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces. Sorry, it's a very graphic example, but it was the one that came up for 1984. And you can see here, it then has the effect. Focalizes the individual compulsion to adopt a violent herd mentality in the presence of tribalistic behavior. Some big words in there: tribalistic behavior, individual compulsion, or we could have made it individual motivation, because that ties in with the rubric. Always good to prioritize rubric terms. But it says everything we need in this amount of time. So there's the effect. And there is the verb, focalizes. Could have just said emphasizes. And then this bit here at the end is the effect. That's the meaning. This bit here is the context of this is giving some context to where we're talking about in the text. Let me color that one up as well. We're going to do purple there. There we go. So in order. And look, that's one sentence. It's a long sentence. You're probably thinking, oh, that's quite long. Yes, it is long, but it's got so much in it. A lot of students would actually take 3 sentences to do all of this. A lot of students would take 3 sentences to achieve what this achieves in 1 sentence. Okay? This is so important. Let me zoom in on this thing. There we go. So again, going through the order there, it goes context, plus it goes into the technique, provides a bit of context around, plus some like plot around it, so we know what we're talking about, plus the quote, a short quote, very short, very efficient. Then it has the verb. You can see it says focalizes, or you could say emphasizes, plus it has an effect that's concise, with good vocabulary, and rubric terms. You don't want to overload the rubric terms for the sake of it, but it does use it, especially when we changed out compulsion to motivation. And it's very specific. It's very specific to the quote. There you go. So that's what you're seeing in that example. So let me know if that makes sense to you. And it's who is it? It's I don't know how to pronounce your username, but it's like Dudend or Dudend or not sure. But does that make sense? Seeing that, that's as clear as I could illustrate the point. It does have flow, especially the reason why this has flow is because I don't have to pause before I get into the quote. And that's always the test. See here, listen to me read this part out from here. Particularly as members of the outer party are overwhelmed by a desire to kill, I'm already into the quote and you would have never known where that happened unless you were looking at it because it flowed. It's being crafted deliberately so that this bit are overwhelmed by a desire to kill is seamless. And we've chosen very selectively where to start the quote and what to put before the quote to achieve that. That takes a lot of work. That takes thought. How do I get that to integrate seamlessly? The shorter the quote, the easier it is to do. That's the key tip. The shorter the quote, the more flexible it is, the more you can just wedge it in somewhere and have it seamlessly work. Now, yes, there are some commas, but it still flows overall, and we're achieving a lot. I would say the main thing is to not have too many commas, especially with your effect. Notice how there are no commas within the effect part. Have a look at the pink. It's all just one statement. There's no list in. I mean, it says a violent herd mentality. That's really it. But there's no big commas where it introduces a whole nother point. It's just one single idea here. No comma right before it, very short quote, and there's only commas here to break up the kind of this context with the evidence. Okay, so that's an example of how efficient you can be when you put in the time to cut everything down. Like this didn't happen straight away. I remember doing this with a student. This took multiple revisions. Started with just a basic quote that was too long. Started with a technique. Started writing what it was about generally. Then we made it more concise. Then we shortened the quote and found a way to work it in. Then we added context at the very start in that order. We didn't just do all of this in one go. So students really struggle with this when they actually try and do everything at once. Instead, why don't you start just writing down the quote, get the technique, get the effect for it, and then put that into a sentence, and then start playing around with things, shorten in the quote, adding in context. Do that after. You have to do your sentences of analysis in steps when you're trying to perfect the essay. Okay, so that's key. So appreciate it, Angus. Appreciate the feedback. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. What you're looking at is an example of how you can get all the elements into one sentence. And if you do that 3 or 4 times in a paragraph, you're good to go. Done. Next paragraph. Right? 3 of these, they don't always have to have context at the start. They could have something to do with form. And in fact, I would be rotating them out. I would be, here's context. In the next one, I refer to form at some point in the sentence, a macro feature that is. Then maybe I have another reference to context after. I'd always have one of those per sentence, but you can mix them up and change the sentence structure a little bit, of course. In terms of other analysis, no analysis for 1917, not on JeddAI. I don't think we've covered either of those 2 texts, unfortunately. So none on there at present. Perhaps in future, 1917. Actually, both great films. I think both got some big Oscar noms. All right, yes, there is. So I'm just wondering if there's a rule of thumb, or you really want like a go-to set of techniques for visual techniques for an image. Well, for a text, there's MEST. MEST is best. MEST is modality, emotive language, syntax, and tone. MEST is best. Got lots of videos on this, but if you are looking at a written text for section 1, always think MEST is best. They're your fallback techniques. Modality, how definitive the language is. High modality, low modality. Make sure you specify which one. Emotive language, super flexible technique. Basically, if the language is kind of evoking a certain emotion in you as you read it, maybe it's not actually, but if it's intended to, presumably, Then you've got emotive language. Maybe it's really passionate language. Anything very emotional in there is going to be emotive. And then syntax, syntax, short sentence, short syntax, long sentence, elongated syntax. These are literally quick techniques you can use. And T is for tone. Tone, just make sure you specify what type of tone. Is it a hostile tone? Is it a welcoming tone? Benevolent, malevolent, whatever suits the text or that quote, you can attribute a specific tone to it. There's your technique. So if you can't find other techniques, MEST is best. Now for visual text, for images, cartoons, kind of photographs, I always use secret chocolate sauce, SCS. Salience, what is the part of the image that stands out? Usually there's one notable part of an image that stands out. Salience. Secret chocolate, contrast. Is there a contrast? Often in an image, there are two things contrasting, right? Could be two symbols that are contrasting. Often it's light and dark. Chiaroscuro lighting could be the case for light versus dark, or you might have different shades or colors, whatever it might be. Look for things that contrast, that are different, and think about why that is. And finally, secret chocolate sauce, another S, symbolism. There's almost always a symbol in the image. So what stands out to you and why? Salience. Maybe it's because it's in the foreground, right at the front of the image. Maybe it's to do with color or lighting or something else. Contrast. What are two things that are contrasting in the image? And symbolism. So I always look for those three in an image. You rarely need to find more than 3 techniques for an image if you are given an image in the exam. Now, hopefully that answers that one. Back to rubric terms. So I mentioned the use of rubric terms. I've never heard of this. What do you mean? What rubric terms need to be used? So for your essays, especially for your common module essays, text and human experiences, it's important that you engage with terms that are in the module description, right? There's a module description published by NESA. And, I'm calling that the rubric. It's a description of what you need to understand about text and human experiences. There's another one for textual conversations or, identity, language, culture. All of those ones, they have like a blurb of information. And that's the place that all of the essay questions come from. So you actually should be really familiar with it because you can almost predict every type of question that could come if you actually know those couple of paragraphs. Now, let me show you an example of that so that it makes sense. So you just go into the NESA website and let me find it. Here we are. When I say rubric, I'm talking about this. I'd be surprised if you hadn't looked at this in class, but at some point. But there are these rubrics. I'm calling it a rubric. It's a module description. What are you meant to learn in text and human experiences? It's your syllabus outline. And you don't need to be familiar with every single paragraph. Like the last few are kind of irrelevant. I mean, I'm not irrelevant, but in terms of what you should be using in your essays, if you want to use some good language, I would focus on the first 2. I would focus on the first 2, and I would literally just look. And Angus, we do these lives most weeks. I'll be doing one next week for sure, and I'll probably do a bonus one 2 days or 1 day before most people's first trial exam, which is in 2 Mondays from now. So we'll keep going up until the final HSC as well. Now, this is a rubric. Individual human experiences, collective human experiences. You just want to pepper this language into your essay throughout. It's not more important than the keywords of the essay question, but remember, the essay questions come from these statements here. You'll go back and have a look at all the past questions. They're all drawn from here. Maybe you get given a specific emotion that is being explored in the text. Maybe there's a human quality, love. There was that question, 2019, Crucible. How does it challenge or get you to reevaluate your understanding of love? That's an emotion that was pulled directly from this part of the rubric. So whether or not it's asked in the question, it's always good to kind of lean on these words. Like if you can talk about a paradox, if at some point you notice, oh, that's actually a bit of a paradox, there's a contradiction there, I'm going to add in the word paradoxically into my essay because it's engaging with the module, even if paradox was not the key word of the question. You don't have to obsess over this. Otherwise, it can become repetitive and you're just throwing things in for the sake of it. But look for opportunities to demonstrate that understanding of the module by really getting familiar with some of the key words in these module descriptions. Common Mod especially this one. And textual conversations has terms like resonances and dissonances. It's good to engage with that language wherever you can. I would say definitely this one by far is the one with the most kind of terms that I would be using. But certainly Module A is the big one as well. Module B doesn't really have that many key terms that you need to use. Talks about textual integrity, form, things that you would be doing anyway. But yeah, Common Mod and Mod A are the big ones where I'd go and look at the NESA rubric. And if you've got JeddAI subscriptions, you go on there, it has the rubric breakdowns where it breaks down all of these sentences. So you can figure out how you would respond to different questions based on different parts of the rubric. So hopefully that answers that. Guys, there is no related text needed for trials or the final HSC. The only exception would be if for any reason you hadn't already been assessed on a related text. Maybe your teacher has explicitly told you in the trials, we're going to have a related text for the common module. But I've never seen that happen, actually. So it will not happen in the final HSC, and it should not happen in the trials. It would only be like if you're in the 1% of schools where they have explicitly told you. There's going to be no surprise about it. Your trials will not involve related text. That should only have been for your first assessment in term 4. Yeah, all of the past questions that you look at from trials in the HSC will only refer to the one prescribed text for common module. For Module C, how do you adapt your reflection to the stimulus? Well, adapting a reflection in Module C to the stimulus, I mean, it's not something you have to do every single sentence. You want to acknowledge it in the first couple of sentences of your introductory paragraph by just using some of the words that were in the question. Feel free to, Kasim, feel free to add an example of a question that you might have in mind, because sometimes the questions for reflections are very vague. But it is important to reference the stimulus in the sense of how you've interpreted it, right? So, in my discursive composition, I have attempted to explore, or I have attempted to engage my reader, or kind of evoke certain feelings of X, and maybe that connects to the stimulus based on, my metaphorical reading of the stimulus. So you could refer to the stimulus very explicitly like that. I think certainly somewhere in the introduction, it's important to engage with it if it's a very specific kind of question, and make sure you've read the reflection first before you even start doing the composition, because you don't want to get caught out by having written something that doesn't actually respond, that doesn't have the reflection in mind, because then that'll make it quicker when you do the reflection question. Okay. So yeah, Kasim, if you have a specific example, I can go through that. Otherwise, it's once in the introduction, and then you can refer to the key word of the stimulus or the task in the topic sentence for each paragraph as well. But other than that, it's more important to engage with the other part of the reflection, which is often how have you done it? What stylistic elements have you used? And for what purpose? When you describe the purpose in your topic sentence, you can link that to a key word of the stimulus, or not so much the stimulus, but the question, what the prompt was, right? But especially if you've used the stimulus in a really symbolic or figurative way, which is often the best way to do it, it would be worth mentioning that again in the introduction to say, I've interpreted the stimulus figuratively to, in a way that conveys X idea. Okay, so it might be good to actually tell the marker how you've used the stimulus in that introduction paragraph. Phoenix, in terms of how to structure reflections, got to redirect you to a YouTube video. I literally have a YouTube video, how to structure your reflection for Module C. So just look that up and it will provide a deconstructed example. Liam, how far out from my trial should I start memorizing my essays? Well, in terms of, again, whether you're memorizing it word for word or just like learning what you need to learn to go into that exam with confidence, I would like to do it within, kind of 7 to 10 days of the exam, depending on how many other things I have to think about. I would already be familiarizing myself about 2 weeks out. Like I would be in that editing process where you're reading it again and again. I'd really be trying to lock a lot of that in. You're obviously cutting things down, but when you get the draft essays to a point where it's the right time, 32 to 34 minutes, and you feel confident with the quality of it, then I'm reading it out again and again and getting as familiar with it as I can before getting to about 7 to 10 days out. And then I'm going to implement my strategy for learning each essay one at a time in full, not necessarily word for word. Again, not everyone can do that, but just learning what you need to learn. I do it one essay at a time, 7 to 10 days out. But before then, I'm already kind of familiar with it because I've been doing so much editing, read-throughs, and then I'm just learning it like a speech, saying it out loud, and occasionally writing out paragraphs to test my knowledge of each paragraph. So I've got a video on how to memorize if anyone wants to look at that. You just type in how to memorize JeddAI, and you will see the step-by-step process that is useful for most students. Again, some students, it doesn't work because everyone works a little bit differently, but that does help most people. In terms of answering form questions for texts, you need to make sure that you already have a draft essay that has lots of form, and then it kind of already answers it. Every essay you do should have a lot of form. Every essay should talk about the importance of the text type. That's the first part of form. So we need to understand what form is. Form is the text type. Okay, it's a prose fiction novel. It's a film. It's a play. Okay, that's the form. But then there's all the features of the form that need to be unpacked. So if it's a prose fiction novel, what's the narration style? What's the genre? Is it a dystopian? Is it a satirical novel? Right? There's a genre to it, and that gives it a certain feel. Then there are features that contribute to that feel. And there's, as I said, there's the narration style as well. Is it stream of consciousness style? What is the style of writing as a whole? Anything that relates to things that occur throughout the whole text, anything that relates to the whole text, that is to do with form. So you have to have a broad interpretation of form so that you can refer to a lot of different things. First of all, don't just think, oh, it's just the fact it's a play. No, you have to link that to stage directions then. You have to link that to characterization as part of it being a play. You have to link that to lighting and any kind of sets that might be important as part of the play. You have to link that to the fact that you're watching a play live. So that's quite visceral. To be watching a play live means it's going to have a certain impact on you as being someone from the audience. It's a communal thing. You have to think about the genre, as I said. Is it a tragic play? You have to kind of isolate all of the elements of form out and emphasize them, give them extra emphasis throughout your essay. So you would say, through the first person narrative voice as part of the prose fiction form, through that first person narrative voice, the author humanizes, because if it's first person, it humanizes, or maybe the first person highlights the subjectivity of truth because it's only from one person's point of view. So you need to have at least one piece of analysis per paragraph that engages with an aspect of the form. And if you have that, you'll be able to very easily deal with a question on form. You just give it extra emphasis. You say it is through the prose fiction form that Orwell is able to reveal X. So you make sure you use that word form, but you always say a type, and then you provide various features, at least one feature of the form in each body paragraph. So that's how you deal with it. All right, just having a look at some other questions here. To elaborate, you elaborated here. For example, for films or poems, I guess there's a distinct quality to those I can talk about, but I don't really feel that for a text. What do you mean for a text? A text is a film, a poem is a text. Do you mean a prose fiction text? A text is everything, by the way. Text and human experiences. It's talking about films, poems, images, novels. I think what you mean is a prose fiction novel, which you should never call a book, because that's just literally the holder of it. But if we're talking about a prose fiction novel, then I already went through a few. The genre, the writing style, is it stream of consciousness? The narrative voice, is it first person? Is it third person limited? Is it third person omniscient? The structure, is it with the chapters? Is there a particular structure? Is it cyclical? Does it end where it began? Anything to do with the structure, how the ideas have been ordered, characterization. You're right. What's unique or significant about the characterizations throughout? You can interpret form quite broadly, but certainly with prose fiction, we're thinking about the descriptive qualities that are enabled by prose fiction. It's not like a poem where you have to compress everything into one line. You can really describe everything quite vividly. So that's a property, a feature of it being a prose fiction novel. And again, prose fiction just means it's a made-up story that's written in normal language, not using a poetic structure like with verse, where you've got one line that's very rhythmic or it has a very specific pattern. So just a general book that you read is a prose fiction novel, most likely. So hopefully that helps you there. How do you choose? This is a good question. How do you choose an appropriate question for your draft essays? You choose a question that you like, that you choose a question that you would love to get in the exam is the first criteria. Secondly, and this usually relates to the first one, people really want to get this broad question. You can choose a broad question that you're comfortable with. It's kind of the same thing as the first. If you would want to get a very broad question, then that would be your preferred question. So it kind of comes back to the first point. Choose the ideal question that you would want to get in an exam. Make sure it's worded in a way that the HSC questions are worded, so it's following that format. But overall, it's just a question you like so that you can write down your ideal argument, and then you can practice reshaping that to different questions when you practice at looking at different questions and rewriting your responses. So choose a question you like, ask your teacher for guidance on that, and also choose a question that encapsulates your understanding of the text, because you can manipulate other questions to suit your understanding and argument more than you'll probably be able to create a new argument on the day to suit a new question. So you really want to have a solid understanding of the text embodied by your essay draft. So your draft reflects your best understanding of the text. You choose a question that allows you to express that, and then you practice adapting that draft to different questions while preserving the integrity of your original response. That's kind of the best strategy to use, especially when you're going into a 40-minute exam. Yes, Bildungsroman does count, especially when we're thinking about form overall. Like if we're using it very generally, a Bildungsroman is a genre, right? It's a coming-of-age story. It means that the character of the story is someone who is developing, they're maturing, they go through some formative events and they end up achieving a certain level of maturity. So it's a coming-of-age story. That's a Bildungsroman. That's the genre, and genre definitely falls under form in the way, in the sense that, in that general sense that I'm talking about. It's to do with the macro. It's to do with the overall character of the text. So absolutely. Now give me a second. I need to find some other questions. So Rahan, when I use human experience in my T.S. Eliot, my teacher tells me I'm way too broad, unclear when I link it with another idea, like, for example, oppression or human connections. How can I be more specific? Oppression. Okay. Yeah, because oppression in itself is broad. You need to focus on having a cause and effect argument. So what is it about the human experience of oppression? Well, usually it's a collective experience. So we can kind of narrow it down. We can say the collective human experience of oppression, or the human experience of a kind of collective or shared oppression. What does that then lead to? Because you need the effect part of that. Okay, you can tell me that there's a state of oppression, an experience of oppression. What type of oppression, right? The collective human experience of oppression often threatens one's individual agency or one's individual freedom. How? Then you can elaborate a little bit more. By punishing them for expressing their beliefs. So you've got this one idea that is a cause and effect statement that's actually unpacking the oppression point. You're saying why it's important, what it's doing, how is someone being oppressed. So your teacher wants you to be more specific by unpacking it and asking yourself. You need to ask yourself, how? So what? What about that? What type of oppression? Psychological? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Orwell explores, or you say, I know you say, oh, this is your topic sentences. So for your topic sentences, you could say something like, the author explores the extent to which the psychological oppression of the collective deprives individuals of their autonomy by stripping away, by punishing them for self-expression, by punishing self-expression. So you've said what oppression does. Oppression takes away people's freedom. And then you ask yourself, how? And if you didn't ask yourself how, you're not going to add the extra bit to the sentence to get more specific. And of course, you need to be drawing upon your understanding of the text to answer those questions. But that's how you kind of unpack it. You keep asking yourself, what type, how, why, so what? I always ask myself those 4 questions if I'm looking to get more specific with my topic sentences or with any sentence. Last one here. When I start adapting my essays to different questions, should I memorize my draft essays before? When I start adapting my essays to different questions, you can do it both. I actually wouldn't wait until you've memorized all your essays until you start practicing adapting or answering different questions. You can have the draft essay sitting up next to you and then have a look at a new question and try write a refined or adapted introduction before you've even memorized it. You can just you can look at it and then practice the skill of adapting. And the reason I wouldn't wait until you've memorized everything to start adapting is because you'll often only finish memorizing the day or 2 before the exam. And then you're not leaving yourself enough time to really practice that skill of adapting. So when I'm kind of finalizing my drafts before I've even memorized, I like to pull up 3 different types of essay questions. And then what I do is I practice rewriting or writing fresh 3 introductions and 3 sets of topic sentences to each of those 3 different questions based on my draft. So I take my draft and I say, how could I change that around? And I really think about it. I don't have to have memorized anything at this point, but I'm looking at it. I'm thinking about how it could adapt. And if I'm finding that certain bits can't adapt, I tweak the draft. You often find that you'll actually find better ways of drafting the piece based on looking at different questions. So that's also why you don't want to wait till the end, because you might realize that there was a better way to structure that sentence so it was more adaptable. So when you're kind of finalizing the draft for each one and cutting them down and timing, that's when I would then look at 3 different essay questions and practice doing 3 new introductions and topic sentences, still using the base that you've created, but rewording certain elements and figuring out where you struggle to reword it, and therefore maybe fine-tuning the draft itself before you go on to memorize. Certainly the day or 2 out, one or 2 days out from your exam, you also want to be doing this exercise of adapting, but I would do it after fine-tuning each draft. But don't wait till you've gone through all the drafts. After each one, have a look at a couple of different questions, ideally 3, do those introductions and topic sentences, then move on to the next draft and do the same. I think that is the ideal structure if you can be disciplined enough to do that. My King Henry essay is talking about Machiavellian leadership and superior leadership, and the other paragraph. Well, hang on a second. So your first paragraph's on Machiavellian leadership and superior leadership in the other paragraph. So you got 2 paragraphs. What should my third? Okay. So leadership, Machiavellian leadership as a superior form of leadership is your first idea. On the go destructiveness of honor. Your second one is about the potential destructiveness of honor. Okay, so it presents this model of Machiavellian leadership as superior. It then says, don't put too much value on honor because that's destructive and counterproductive. Okay, I can see that flow. And then what should my third paragraph be? So yeah, it's an interesting way of thinking about it. You've got Machiavellian leadership I wouldn't necessarily argue that it's superior in the first paragraph, because you're kind of getting to the conclusion. I don't know if that is your conclusion. I wouldn't want to get to the conclusion of what good leadership is in the first paragraph. So the way I like to think about Henry is, I like to think, hey, we present a couple of extreme forms of honor or lack of honor, right? So you have the character foils in there as well, Falstaff, Hotspur. You have a traditional model of leadership. So maybe that's the Machiavellian form. So Machiavellian form of leadership, is that superior? We don't know, but it explores that. Too much honor, though, is not a good thing. Not enough honor is certainly not a good thing. So you could do like too much honor, not enough honor, and then what is the right mix? And what's this new form or new model of leadership that comes out is what I would explore in the third. Like, what is the blend? And I like in the third paragraph focusing on the power of narrative, the politicization of the human story. The politicization of the human story. That means making the human story something that is that can be weaponized or leveraged for political gain, which is what Hal ultimately does, right? Hal plays into his human story of resilience, the hero's journey, rising up from the ashes, and that allows him to cultivate a following and political support. So his model of leadership is more about leveraging the human story and appealing to the masses. And he suggests that's the way to do it. You can't have so much honor that you're completely stubborn and stuck in that way. And you've already explained the destructive potential of that in the second body. But you have to have a relatability to the people as well, and be one with the people. Because the first paragraph could be more about how certain leaders, the traditional model of leadership, is more about having a distance with the people, but that's not always effective, right? So you can kind of go through it that way. I think the third body paragraph, you really want to land on what is the ideal form of leadership embodied by Hal, and what does that look like, and why is that effective? For T.S. Eliot, should I be splitting my paragraphs by poem with my thesis exploring one theme? Let's reframe that a little bit. For T.S. Eliot, you should have one thesis, but your introduction should certainly introduce three different ideas. But there should be one thesis in terms of, what is Eliot's poetry ultimately trying to do? Is he using fragmentation to challenge or subvert the tropes of modernity, or like the pitfalls of modernity? Like, why is modernity bad? Because X and Y, loss of connection, loss of spiritual purpose, fragmentation's doing that. Okay, so you got one overarching thesis. I wouldn't then think about each paragraph as being one poem, even though one poem will be the main source of evidence. You've got to remember that you are exploring T.S. Eliot's poetry as a whole. So you should only, in your topic sentences, ideally, I wouldn't even be referring to a specific poem. I would be referring to Eliot's poetry as a whole and introducing three concepts that are inspired primarily by three different poems. Yes. So introduce the concept in the first topic sentence, but don't mention a specific poem. And then in the second sentence, bring in a poem as an example. It's a primary example of that concept. And then you can have 3 or 4 pieces of evidence based on that poem. So yes, it is one poem per paragraph, but you should be leading with 3 ideas, 3 concepts that relate to Eliot's poetry as a whole, breaking down how, Eliot's poetry uses fragmentation to project, the anxieties of the modern individual through the external world. And then the next one might be, in terms of the interior world of the modern individual, there's been, subversion of gender roles, or a loss of self-assurance. You could then talk about proof rock for that one. And then the last one's like, there's a need for spiritual renewal, or you might talk about the challenges of finding spiritual renewal in such a world that it's hard to find spiritual purpose. And you talk about a journey of the Magi at the end. So you need to have concepts, and then you need to have a core poem to back each one up. I always like having a concept like the external world reflecting internal turmoil or inner turmoil as the first paragraph, and you can talk about preludes or rhapsody. Then the second body could be about that loss of that identity crisis, that existential crisis, whereby the modern man is questioning his role in society, and that leads to a loss of connection with others. That's proof rock, ideally, and you've also got Hollow Men as a good supplement. You only pick one per poem, as you're saying. And then the third body, it's always good to talk about the need for spiritual redemption, spiritual renewal. And I always like Journey the Magi for that one. Would it be better to have more points in your draft essays, more words basically, as it'll give you more quote verbs, techniques, is that what you mean by cuvettes, to choose from that are more relevant to the question? I could see some value for doing that. I think it depends on which essay it is. Like if you're doing T.S. Eliot and there are 5 possible poems and you've done one poem for 3 paragraphs each, then you've got 2 other poems that you should definitely be aware of. And I would at least know on the side, 3 quotes or techniques from each of those. I would definitely learn those just in case that specific poem gets asked. Otherwise, I wouldn't worry about it too much. In terms of having better evidence for certain questions, the best evidence you can have is to do with form and the macro features. And I would be shaping majority of my evidence around the general style, even if occasionally I have very specific pieces of evidence. I would have examples that really relate to the bigger ideas and that connect to the form of the text. And then it's super adaptable anyway. So I wouldn't really be banking on having all of these additional pieces of analysis unless you're fine. Well, put it this way. If you look at some practice questions and you think, this quote just never seems to work, it's probably a bad quote. You probably haven't picked a good piece of evidence. So you need to have good evidence in the first place, and that will be highly adaptable. The main thing you're going to end up changing on the day is not the evidence, it's how you explain it. So you can have a really good piece of evidence, a good quote that kind of encapsulates a key idea, and then the way you word the effect of that should change based on the key terms of the question you get. So it's not about the evidence changing, it's about the explanation changing. But then again, if you've chosen bad evidence, you might struggle to relate that to any question. So I would think more about your original choice of evidence, try and relate it as much as you can to the macro features and the overall ideas. Make sure it's solid examples and it can not only be used for like one very specific niche idea, and then focus more on how do you adapt your explanation of that evidence to a new question versus changing out the evidence. All right, I'm just going to pick a couple of other ones. Not sure if this is relevant. I need to discuss the effects of changes to the law by referencing the question of whether Australia should adopt nuclear energy. Wow, I don't know if this is relevant. I mean, we are mainly doing English here, but appreciate the question. The effects of changes to the law by referencing the question of whether Australia should adopt nuclear energy. How should I structure my paragraphs? Yeah, I mean, when you do a general essay structure like this, first of all, you just want to break down each paragraph into one key element that responds to the question. So if it's saying discuss the effects of changes to the law in relation to nuclear energy, I'm not too sure exactly with the way you've worded that what the actual question is. You say by referencing the question. Whether or not this is more of a nuclear energy question or a legal question, but you break it up into the different effects. One paragraph, have your leading point, and then you would have an example. And you need to. The key thing is when you're discussing the effects, you want to have the point, the effect, that explain the effect further, give us some evidence, maybe bring in a counterpoint to say, this is the challenge with this, and then move on to the next one. I think a more concise kind of approach there works. But again, I would need more context. I would need to see the exact question and know what subject it was for to give you a more precise structural guide for that. How should critical theories be integrated or not into a paragraph? Well, critical theories can be, they don't have to be explicitly worked into a Module B response, for instance. And Module B is the only one. Module B Advanced is the only one where I would really think about having a critical theory in an English Advanced or standard essay. It would only be module B for advanced where I'd bring that in explicitly. You could refer to other perspectives in, module A, post-colonial, feminist. You can still use those terms, but in terms of explicit reference, module B is probably the one you're referring to the most. How should critical theories be integrated? Very minimally is the first thing. Like, you should be relying on your own personal interpretation. That's what they're looking for. But it is good if occasionally you can show an acknowledgement of what another perspective is and why you might agree or disagree with that. You don't say, I agree with it, but you might give your explanation of a particular piece of evidence, and you might say, this is reinforced, or this reinforces the feminist perspective or the post-colonial perspective that da-da-da-da. And you go on, you can reference the theory as a whole. You can reference a theory by its overall category or title. So postmodern, feminist, post-colonial, those kind of broad literary terms for critical theories, you can refer to those. Psychoanalytical, Freudian, those terms. But you could also refer to a specific critic, what they have said, and you could use a short quote, very short quote by a critic, if you feel like it really reinforces what you're saying, or if you feel like what you've said actually proves that particular critic wrong. That could be a more advanced way of dealing with it. But I would only do this. I would do this very sparingly. I would not do it in your introduction. And I would only do it like once or twice, maximum once per paragraph, perhaps towards the end, if you're going to refer to a specific critic. But it is not needed to get full marks. So be careful with it. If you're going to do it, make sure you have it reviewed and are confident that you're using it correct and it's not overriding your personal perspective. Even if your personal perspective is fully informed by a critic, it needs to sound like your personal interpretation of the text. Just to give you a quick answer here. So what are topics I can use for a Module C discursive model draft to make it easy to adapt? The easiest discursive pieces to adapt in terms of the ideas are the ones that are to do with the nature of creating text itself. So writing about the craft of writing, writing about different forms of writing, writing about different types of writers, writing about different types of artists, writing about different inspiration, different kind of ways of using your imagination. Anything to do with the creative process is a great topic for a discursive, because very often the prompts, the stimuli, will be to do with something about the creative process. It doesn't have to be about writing itself, but that kind of meta fictional approach where you write about the process of writing, or you write about the process of creating something. Where does imagination come from? The different types of writers. What's it mean to have writer's block? Writing about the topic of creating something, like a piece of writing, fiction versus nonfiction, some kind of artistic endeavor. Maybe it's creating music. Pick something you like. Pick something artistic or creative, and they're often the easiest ones to adapt to different stimuli. In terms of the order that you should approach Module 2 with, you should do the papers in order. You always want to leave Module C to the end, because if you have gone over time on the 2 essays, which again, you should do in order, just do Module A first, Module B, make sure you'd already timed your drafts and cut them down to 32-ish minutes so that you don't run out of time when you're trying to answer the question as well in the day and dealing with an unknown question. You've got to allow time to think and adapt. That's why you have a 32-minute draft. You can spend 40 minutes on it then. You've got 8 minutes to rework parts of your response and think about that question. But let's say you do go over. Module C is the most forgiving, in the sense that if you write a shorter Module C piece than you anticipated because you were running short on time, maybe you only have 30 minutes to do the whole of Module C because you took 45 minutes on the 2 essays, you can still get full marks for writing a shorter response, because it's more about quality over quantity. Whereas with an essay, even though it is about quality over quantity, if you don't write an introduction, you lose marks. So in your Module C piece, if you don't write the last thing that you meant to write, no one knows, as long as it's it makes sense as kind of the last point or the last sentence. You could have finished it 2 paragraphs earlier than you wanted to. No one knows. Only you knew your piece. Whereas if you don't write a conclusion in an essay, that is a structural component you have missed, and everyone knows. You can see it. There's no conclusion. So the essay is less forgiving, meaning you need to do those first. And if you are running short on time, you want it to be on module C, because you can already plan ahead and have a shorter version that you are prepared to write. You can have paragraphs that you would cut out from a draft, for instance, in the event that you're running short on time, and you could still have a complete piece, and you can still get full marks. So that's the logic behind that. For advanced and standard, do both papers in order. What should I work on if I have limited time before an exam? Should I be doing questions under time, or should I work? Okay, so should I make a stronger base without doing many past questions? Yeah, I would prioritize getting a really strong base for each essay. So again, 3 strong base essays that you're really happy with. You've cut them down and timed them, learn them really well. And even if it's the day before and that's the only time you have, then you can practice adapting that to different questions. But if you know a really good base essay and you're prepared to adapt and answer the question and sacrifice certain parts of that, then you're going to go better, I think, than not learning those core pieces, having less sophisticated material at hand, and having done a little bit more practice on past questions. Ideally, you do both, though, obviously, but you're asking which one would I pick. I would pick knowing a base really well and trying to squeeze in some time just before the day of your exam to look at some different questions, write a few different introductions and topic sentences using your base as the inspiration. And that's going to get you, 80, 90% of the way there. All right, we're going to end it there, guys. So I hope that has been helpful for you. Great to see so many of you join in with some really good questions. Great questions tonight. Again, I could go through more of the 2024 paper, but in fact, it's probably better that I do that in an off the live stream and kind of break it down really concisely for you and publish that as a separate YouTube video that you can watch anytime. So we'll try and do some paper reviews. So go through the 2024 section 1, show you exactly how to answer those ones. How do you answer the essay questions? How do you think about those different essay questions? I'm going to try my best to get a couple of those video breakdowns on YouTube for you published, not on the live stream. But I'll be back next week, next Tuesday, to answer any more questions that you have. And as I said, I'll probably do a bonus session a day or 2 out from your trials, at least for most students. Hey, appreciate the feedback. 10 times better than the teacher. Look, appreciate it. I'm glad this is helping. And again, use the links below the live streams if you have any more questions. And make sure to check out JeddAI.com. This is where we have all of our resources. You can get access to JeddAI. You can submit some essay drafts for feedback from our team. So real life human markers from our team will review your essays and get that back to you as quickly as possible. That's if you need essay feedback, how can you actually make it better? And you can also use the JeddAI tool, which is trained against the actual rubrics that you will be assessed on in your trials and HSC. So it's like a ChatGPT made exactly for you, and it will give you very specific feedback. Plus, you get access to the experts. So JeddAI.com for resources and marking. And otherwise, we'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you very much for joining. Appreciate you, Phoenix. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.